Quote, "Our crusade is the only war in which the rich who went off to fight came back even richer." End quote. Franco made these surprisingly candid remarks in a 1942 speech. The history of the Spanish Civil War and the Francoist dictatorship represents many things, but among them, it's the story of a small number of individuals and families who amassed vast fortunes by being close to the power circles of the new state built by General Francisco Franco. I'm David Cott, host of New History of Spain, and this is the final episode in our series on Juan March Ordinas, the Mallorcan who became the richest man in Spain. This time we'll look at some of his post-war business ventures, his period of opposition to the Franco regime he helped bring to power, the origins of his foundation, and his death and legacy. Let's dive into the final years of one of the most influential figures in 20th century Spanish history. We've already seen how Juan March played a critical role in the Spanish Civil War and made a fortune from it through loans, arms trafficking, and controlling foreign trade. March made a risky gamble on the rebels, but it paid off, further cementing his status as Spain's wealthiest man. Though, as it usually happens with these so-called patriots, he kept most of his money in Switzerland and the UK. According to a London newspaper in 1943, he was the 7th richest man in the world, thanks to massive wartime profits. While millions had died, fled, or endured extreme hardship, the Merchant of Death built himself a palace in Palma de Mallorca. In early 1939, he founded Aucona to centralize his export and import activities, at a time when he effectively monopolized Spain's foreign trade. Shortly before the Civil War ended, he also founded Juan March and Company in London, aiming to control Spain's currency market and trade with the UK. The company acted as a financial agency, brokerage, and currency exchange. One of its directors was a British intelligence agent, underscoring Marx's strong ties with the British government. Back in Spain, the Mallorcan tycoon profited immensely from black market sales that bypassed state controls, taking full advantage of the post-war misery. He never stopped smuggling. In the 1950s, he was still trafficking tobacco, with American priests even smuggling him cigarettes. This despite the fact that when Tabacalera was founded in 1945 to monopolize tobacco sales, the March family owned about 10% of the company. As we saw in the episode on British bribes, Juan March did business with both sides during World War II, though mainly with the Allies, and made a killing in arms trafficking. During this time, Spain's richest men ramped up exports of essential goods. This took place between 1939 and 1942, during the deadliest famine in Spanish history, which claimed the lives of over 200,000 people. But the capitalist traitor couldn't care less. Spain had become a totalitarian state, so he no longer had to face protests over food shortages like he did when Mallorcans starved due to his exports during World War I. Arturo Dixon shared an anecdote that perfectly captures who March was. Quote, "A ship arrived from Czechoslovakia at a Spanish port, loaded with shoes. Upon inspection, all the shoes were for the left foot, and thus useless. The only person who bid on them, naturally at a very low price, was Juan March. Soon after, another ship arrived, this time loaded with right foot shoes. Again, March bought them at a ridiculously low price. Only he knew the two shipments were a match, and both were declared by customs as unfinished goods, meaning they were exempt from taxes." End quote. But Marx's relationship with the Franco dictatorship was not always smooth. As Franco consolidated power, he grew increasingly irritated by the debts owed to March from the war and wasn't willing to let Marx's monopolization of foreign trade jeopardize Spain's financial stability. March clashed especially with Demetrio Carceller, Minister of Commerce and Industry, a Phalangist who supported extreme state interventionism and enriched himself through black market commissions and foreign trade deals involving tungsten and oil. Carceller was thus a direct competitor to March. These power struggles are best understood within the context of the Franco regime being, as we saw earlier, a kleptocracy, the government of the thieves. In 1941, Carceller accused March of being a Freemason and of causing material shortages in Spain. Labor Minister José Antonio Girón even called for him to be executed for high treason. Interior Minister Valentin Galarza was ordered to revoke Mark's passport and place him under house arrest. But Galarza was among those who received British bribes directly from Mark and tipped him off so he could flee the country. Mark wrote to Franco denying the accusations and requested to appear before the Council of Ministers to defend himself, where he threatened to expose the corruption of 2 or 3 ministers. The Phalangist faction hated Mark for embodying the stereotype of the ruthless, stateless capitalist. But Mark hadn't financed a military coup to install a regime that would interfere with his business dealings. In July 1942, a Spanish intelligence briefly detained Mark, suspecting him of involvement in a monarchist conspiracy against Franco. After his release, he didn't take any chances. He fled to Lisbon, a hub of monarchist plotting. Other monarchists, like Pedro Sainz Rodriguez and José Gil Robles, also moved to Portugal to avoid arrest by the Franco regime. Following the Allied Operation Torch in North Africa in November 1942, both public and private pressure to restore the monarchy in Spain intensified. Juan de Borbón declared it was time to replace Franco's dictatorship, which many saw as a transitional regime to dismantle the labor movement. Monarchist generals like Orgaz and Quindelán urged Franco to step down and return to a more authentically Spanish system, a Catholic monarchy rather than a foreign-inspired fascist regime. Mark spent at least 1 million Swiss francs supporting Juan de Borbón during World War II. The banker believed the Franco dictatorship should be replaced by a monarchy accepted by the left and capable of unifying Spain. He essentially anticipated what would later become the Spanish transition to democracy. By 1944, Allied victory seemed inevitable, and the alliance of democratic forces was formed by socialists, anarchists, and republicans, excluding communists. Franco and his regime feared that, though they had won the civil war, they could still lose power. Mark held a meeting with opposition forces at the apartment of his lover, Matilde Reig. He handed a blank check to Regulo Martínez, president of the alliance, telling him to fill in whatever amount he wanted. The opposition sought funds to launch a propaganda campaign exposing Franco's corruption, but Mark refused. He feared it might cost him his life. Ultimately, nothing came of the plan, but Franco found out about the meeting. Mark returned to Portugal after receiving word that Franco had expressed a desire to have him killed. After the war, he settled in Geneva, Switzerland, although he continued to visit Spain frequently. In 1946, realizing that the Franco regime was here to stay and that the victorious allies weren't making moves to remove him, Mark announced he would no longer fund the monarchist opposition led by Juan de Borbón. Mark did not maintain a close relationship with Franco after the Civil War. His son, Bartolomé Marc, often visited El Pardo Palace and brought members of the dictator's inner circle into the family's business dealings. So the relationship between Franco and Mark can best be described as a marriage of convenience. There was no love or mutual trust, only shared interests. And if you have a shared interest in Spanish history, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and if you are a true fan, become a supporter at patreon.com/newhistoryspain. Despite their significant clashes, Francisco Franco knew how to handsomely reward Juan March for his support. The Mallorcan financier took advantage of the context of World War II to take hostile action against foreign companies operating in Spain and buy them at rock-bottom prices. That's exactly what he did with the Mallorcan branch of General Electric. After sustained harassment, the owners were pressured into selling it to March in 1942. But the biggest gift the Francoist dictatorship gave to Juan March was Barcelona Traction. This was Catalonia's electric company, popularly known as La Canadiense. In terms of assets, it was the third largest company in Spain and supplied 20% of the country's electricity. It was a holding company with a highly complex and opaque corporate structure, built on foreign capital and designed in part to avoid paying taxes in Spain. Its main shareholder and executive was Denny Heinemann, a Jewish businessman with American and Belgian citizenship who, since the Spanish Civil War, had not been able to exercise effective control over the company. First because it was collectivized during the war, and then because Franco banned foreign companies from purchasing foreign currency. The Ministry of Industry wouldn't allow rate hikes or authorize new investments. And because the company collected payments in pesetas, constantly devaluing, and had to repay creditors in British pounds, it was in a precarious financial situation. Starting in 1945, March began buying up Barcelona Traction bonds until he became its largest creditor. Following the founding of the United Nations and Spain's exclusion from the organization, there was a strong anti-foreign business sentiment that March capitalized on. He portrayed himself as a patriotic Spaniard willing to use his wealth to stand up to the same international financial oligarchies he himself was part of. Ideologically, and as a reward for his contribution during the war, Franco was happy to see a major company fall into the hands of a Spanish capitalist. On February 12, 1948, a judge in the town of Reus, Tarragona, declared La Canadiense bankrupt after March's associates filed a lawsuit demanding payment of the bonds. This ruling placed the creditors' interests above those of shareholders, and March was the largest creditor. The idea that March bribed the judge to obtain such a wildly disproportionate ruling is not even debated, especially since many other companies weren't declared bankrupt simply for lacking access to foreign currency. Just days after the ruling, and before Barcelona Traction's shareholders or executives could react due to lack of proper notice, an appeal was filed by a man later revealed to be one of March's associates. This move blocked the actual owners of the company from filing their own appeal. March's men immediately took control of Barcelona Traction, sparking fruitless negotiations with Heinemann and protests from the governments of Belgium, the United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States. In the end, however, the British acted in favor of their former wartime ally. In January 1952, a public auction was held for the company. The only bidder was Fuerzas Eléctricas de Catalunya, or FECSA, an electric company created by Juan March specifically for this occasion, with backing from banks including Santander and Pastor. The purchase price was 10 million pesetas, while the company's estimated value ranged between 1 billion and 3 billion pesetas. It was an outright theft disguised as legality. This is just one of the many examples proving that the Franco dictatorship was a kleptocracy, a regime focused on enriching those close to power. The Jewish magnate could have submitted an equal or higher offer to block the sale, but all attempts to appeal the ruling failed. Shareholders filed lawsuits in Spanish courts, but under Franco there was no judicial independence. No one could stand up to the government or to March. When the US negotiated the normalization of diplomatic relations with Francoist Spain, Washington raised the issue and warned of the negative impact it would have on Spain's image among international investors. Franco dismissed the concern as a private matter and claimed there was nothing he could do. Ultimately, the United States granted a $100 million loan to Spain, kicking off the regime's international reintegration. The Barcelona Traction case didn't affect Spain's ability to attract foreign investment. It ended up before the International Court of Justice in The Hague, which ruled in favor of the March interests in 1970, by which time both Juan March and Denny Heinemann were dead. By the 1950s, already in his old age, Juan March sought to reinvent himself as a benefactor. As Spain's wealthiest man, he was also the biggest contributor to charitable campaigns organized by the dictatorship against tuberculosis, for military widows and orphans, and similar causes. Using his fortune tainted by blood and corruption, March, primarily through his wife, financed religious and charitable works, including building a Franciscan school in Palma. However, his greatest philanthropic move came in 1955. Inspired by Anglo-American models of elite philanthropy, the Mallorcan capitalist established the Fundación Juan March, a way to ensure his name would be remembered for generations, to whitewash his reputation and to lower his tax burden. The foundation supports education through scholarships and student and researcher exchanges, promotes culture, and funds scientific research. March launched it with 3 million pesetas and $1.2 million, making it the wealthiest foundation in Europe, on par with major American philanthropic institutions. In the following years, the March family raised the foundation's endowment to 1 billion pesetas. The idea to establish the foundation came from Joan Mascaró, a Catalan nationalist born in the same town of Santa Margalida and a former employee of March. While accompanying Mark's son abroad for a school, Mascaró earned a degree in languages and went on to become a leading Sanskrit scholar. In 1951, he wrote to Mark suggesting he follow the example of other millionaires by founding social or cultural projects that would secure his legacy. Juan March wanted to die knowing people would mourn and honor him, and he got his wish. Upon his death, he was remembered for his foundation. And to this day, many people don't even know who Juan March really was. Speaking of his death, on February 25, 1962, Juan March's chauffeur was driving a Cadillac through Madrid to take him to a meeting when a car traveling in the opposite direction crashed violently into the vehicle carrying Spain's richest man. The 81-year-old billionaire bore the brunt of the impact, suffering numerous fractures and traumatic shock, though he remained conscious. The renowned Catalan doctor Josep Trueta traveled from London to examine him, as did Dr. Puigvert from Barcelona. But given March's age and multiple injuries, survival seemed unlikely. He amended his will to increase the Fundación Juan March's endowment to 2 billion pesetas. Though he showed some signs of improvement, no one dared offer an optimistic prognosis. His lover, Matilde Reig, family members, and Francoist ministers visited him. On March 4th, a priest heard his confession and administered last rites. March had never been religious, but he likely figured it was pragmatic to secure a spot in heaven, just in case. In his final days, the signs of recovery vanished, and he entered a delirious state. Juan March Ordinas died on March 10th, 1962. Funeral masses were held in Madrid and Palma de Mallorca, attended by all the prominent figures of the time. Banca March and FEXA suspended operations, and Trans-Mediterranean ships flew their flags at half-mast. He was buried in the family mausoleum in Palma, next to his wife, who had died a few years earlier. News of his death made front pages around the world, describing him as the most mysterious man in the world and the Spanish Rockefeller. A scholarship recipient sent this letter, quote, "I never met Don Juan, but I will never forget his name. Without his help, I will never have set foot in a university. Please accept this small note of condolence." End quote. So, who was Juan March Ordinas? After studying his life, I will describe the Mallorcan as a capitalist with no scruples whatsoever in achieving his goals. Whenever possible, he sought others' cooperation, or induced it through bribery. He used political and corporate corruption to become Spain's richest man, and anyone who refused to bend to his will paid dearly for it. He had no morality beyond money. March was a man driven, and I will say obsessed, with becoming ever wealthier and more influential. There was never a moment when he said, "Alright, I'm satisfied with what I have, now I will enjoy life." President Manuel Azaña described him in 1932 as bold, intelligent, and full of rage. Juan March was not the stereotypical Italian-style mob boss, a patriarch surrounded by a sprawling family. He was a solitary figure backed by salaried lackeys who made himself indispensable and used politics to ensure his business success. He surrounded himself with competent technicians who were loyal. A highly individualistic and egocentric man, he only cared about his own interests. That's why he had no qualms about supplying both sides in a war. What mattered was making money. When it suited him, he presented himself as a patriot, a capitalist who loved workers, a religious man, or a patron of the arts and sciences. But those were just facades, ways to justify his actions and clean up his image. Juan March Ordinas was without a doubt one of the smartest, most ambitious, amoral, and important men in 20th century Spain. Juan March's will named his eldest son, Juan March Cervera, as sole heir. He received full ownership of 60% of the estate, with usufruct rights over the remaining 40% going to two of Juan's grandchildren. In contrast, the younger son, Bartolomé, was left with only the minimum legal share. March barely had a relationship with Bartolomé. Rumors said that he wasn't even March's biological son. He was, however, the apple of his mother Eleanor's eye, and she left him all of her wealth. Bartolomé was a patron of the arts and a collector, a bon vivant far removed from his father's capitalist ethos. Perhaps that's why Juan March rejected him and didn't want to break up the family fortune. But that's not the main point. The real question is, What legitimacy does Juan March's fortune have? And why is it that today the March family remains one of the richest in Spain? Historical memory around the Second Republic, the Civil War, and the Franco Dictatorship is still a fiercely contested ideological battlefield, because those who benefited from Francoism know that acknowledging the regime's illegitimacy and its crimes could open the door to demands for economic reparations and restitution of stolen assets, as happened in Germany with Nazi victims. In the March family's case, it's not just that they profited under the Franco regime. Their shady dealings began long before. As we've seen throughout this series on Juan March, their fortune was built through corruption, smuggling, arms trafficking, real estate speculation, bank irregularities, illegal monopolies, the export of food during times of famine, murder, and financing the military uprising in the Civil War, not to mention exploitative labor practices typical of capitalism. From my anarchist perspective, private property is inherently illegitimate because it's founded on and perpetuates inequality of both wealth and power. It's unacceptable that wealth, produced through collective efforts over centuries, be monopolized by a few who live off the labor of others. But even if you don't question private property or inheritance, I believe anyone with a shred of morality will see that it's unjust to concentrate and perpetuate wealth in a family that has committed so many crimes, many of them against the majority of Spaniards. Our legal and political system protects major thieves like Juan March, while the full weight of the law falls on those who commit petty theft. How can anyone justify this injustice? How can someone with a straight face say that Juan March was a great entrepreneur and that his family's fortune is simply the reward of genius and hard work, and that if you are poor, it's because you are lazy? How can anyone still fall for the capitalist myth of meritocracy? It's shameful that Spain's law of democratic memory was not applied to the Fundación Juan March, which bears the name of the principal and most indispensable financier of the coup and the rebels in the Civil War. But of course, it's easier to go after the political and military elites of the past, who are no longer in power, than the economic elites who benefited from Francoism and still thrive today. Abolishing capitalism and private property, I believe, is the simplest way to start with a clean slate. After all, the creation of family wealth, any families, likely involved some kind of exploitation and abuse. But now I ask you, what do you think about the legitimacy of Juan March's inheritance and the whitewashing of his image through the foundation? What are your thoughts on inheritance in general? In any case, I hope that if you have watched the full series on Juan March Ordinas, you have learned a lot about this hugely important but rarely discussed figure in Spanish history, mainly because no one wants to upset the March family. And I hope it has led you to deeper reflections on the system we live in, one that rewards unscrupulous figures like Juan March. If so, please give it a like and share to help spread the word, and subscribe to the channel if you are new. You can support me on patreon.com/newhistoryspain in exchange for exclusive perks, or by making a donation. Links are in the description. Thanks for listening and see you next time!